If you know me, you probably know that I love Eclair Cookie. He's the star of the longest fanfiction I've ever written to date, and he's fully ascended in my game as a free-to-play. I grinded those soul cores. So when it comes to thinking of characters to analyze for my channel, he's one of the first who comes to mind. He might not be the most important character in the lore, and he might not be as crazy meta as he was before, but he holds a special place in my heart regardless. And I want to share some of the joy that he brings me by over-explaining his role on YouTube. Our story begins with the War Under Shattered Skies update in January 2022. Eclair Cookie gets released alongside Tea-Night Cookie. And as Cookie's released simultaneously tend to be, he has a deep connection to Tea-Night in his story. In said story, we learn that Eclair has two jobs: teaching at the Parfadian Institute and curating a museum. If you happen to promote him, you'll learn that this museum is his own, having founded it without the help of his family. Unfortunately, this is the only information we've gotten on his family thus far, so whether his family was a positive or negative influence is something we can't be certain about. In this same scene, we also learned that Eclair and Espresso's offices were previously next to each other. At first I thought this was just done for the bit, but after looking in the fan kit, I realized that their names come one after another alphabetically. Whether this was planned from the start or not, I have no idea, but I found it neat nonetheless. After this initial interaction with Espresso, Eclair takes the back seat for most of the story, only really making an appearance when the Alliance first finds Tea-Night. It's revealed that Eclair idolizes Tea-Night, going as far as to explain most of his backstory even though Tea-Night isn't in the mood to talk. After this encounter, he disappears until the story's very end, ready to write it down. And that ends the only major story Eclair's been in. He's shown up since for cameos and side stories, and he showed up in the Triple Cone Cup if you happen to get sorted into Parfadia, but otherwise he hasn't really been moving the plot along. Although we don't get much from his introductory story, we do learn more about Eclair through his overworld and cookie viewing screen quotes. He's the meticulous type that hates dust and stains, he reads for hours on end, and he's obsessed with ancient history. Combined with what we get from the story, we can conclude that he has a special interest in dragons and dragon fighter cookies. You might have noticed that I said special interest just now. And you might have also noticed this little infinity symbol that I put in the thumbnail. These are both commonly associated with autism. While it might just be a headcanon at the end of the day, Eclair displays many tendencies that lead me to headcanoning him as autistic. I bring this up not to force my headcanons down other people's throats, but because this particular headcanon, the headcanon that Eclair is autistic, plays a central role into how I see him as a character. And I see Eclair's autism as something inseparable from his personhood and how he interacts with the world. I can't talk about how I see him without bringing it up, in the same way I fail to talk about myself without bringing it up. Yes, I am autistic myself, if that wasn't obvious at this point. Exhibit A is how he speaks about dragons. He'll eagerly talk the ear off of anyone who's willing to listen. When Espresso asks if he can examine his research, Eclair will, quote, gladly let him borrow the books. He even tries to rope Espresso into presenting the story of the newfound alliance with him in the year-in-review story for the War Under Shattered Skies update. He's very particular about how history is presented, hence the trusty scroll he always has beside him. Whether you win or lose, he's writing down the results of the battle. Sometimes if you lose, he'll mention writing his book, something he also mentions when you fully ascend him. Exhibit B is his tendency to not follow societal norms. It's common for autistic people to not be able to read the room, or to not quite understand the unspoken rules of society. Eclair can be seen doing this while he talks about his passion for the Tea Leaf Order in front of Tea-Night. Tea-Night doesn't want to talk about his past, and Cream Puff seems to understand this, but Eclair keeps on explaining their legacy despite Tea-Night's disdain. Paging back to the 2022 year-in review cutscene, he outright tells Espresso he previously thought he might be rude. One of those things you're not supposed to do, but probably have never been explicitly told not to. Teetering on headcanon territory is his sense of fashion being against traditional gender norms. In both his regular and his Star Dreamer's costume, he wears a dress. There's never been an instance of him wearing pants. Maybe that's just how Parfadian men are, but prune juice and espresso seem to wear pants. At least when they wear costumes. And look, I get it. Cookie Run as a franchise is far more lax than our world when it comes to gender norms. But even with those norms, Eclair stands out with his corset and floor-length dress. He has a naturally feminine silhouette. If you knew nothing about Cookie Run and just saw his shadow, you'd probably assume that he was a girl. He never says anything about trying to break gender norms, though, so it's possible he doesn't believe in them like others do. It's very common for people on the autistic spectrum to have transgender or non-binary identities because of this sort of thing. And that's a statement I can back up with research. And finally, Exhibit C, his aforementioned special interests. Note where Eclair shows up in his original story. He's there to provide research materials about dragons, to give context regarding T-Knight, and to keep a record of the Alliance's fight with Pattaya Dragon. But when it comes to the formation of the Alliance, or actually fighting the battle, he's nowhere to be seen. In his own words, he's a scholar, not a warrior. He's always talking about history, even in his day-to-day interactions, whether that be explaining the various exhibits at the museum, or going off about how he wants a cake that reminds him of the Hollyberry Kingdom. A one-track interest-fueled heart just screams autism, at least to me. That headcanon is what made me love him so much. I may not be a scholar, and I may not like history, but I see myself in him. From his exaggerated voice that gets too loud sometimes, to his meticulousness in record-keeping, I find his mannerisms are ones that I emulate myself. My current special interests are video editing and Cookie Run. And I think you can see where that ended up. All in all, Eclair is a cookie I see lots of myself in. It's funny how sometimes people will go out of their way to be negative about themselves, yet fawn over characters that act like them. I'm no therapist. I don't intend to end a Cookie Run analysis video of all things with some mind-changing life lesson. But I will say this. If you can't quite love yourself yet, put that love into the characters that make you feel seen. The ones that make you feel like you're not alone. And perhaps, just maybe, you'll find a bit of that love extending onto yourself. And that's enough for me. Mahi Meghan out. Peace.